All right, get us hooked up here. All right, hi Sai, Karate Illuminati, this is Noah, and this is my second live stream here on TikTok, so we'll see how that goes. So for those of you who aren't aware of how this works, I'll give a little bit of a rundown of that. We'll wait for some people to join here before I get into that, and we'll go from there. All right. So the gist of how I usually run these when I do them on Instagram is to do a little bit of karate training, either kata or kihon, maybe some bag work, although I can't do that today because I just broke the ring that holds my bag up. Or I will go through hojo-ando, which would be supplementary exercises with various traditional and modern training tools. And of course do Q&A. So as people come in, have questions or topics for discussion, things they'd like to see or have me talk about, we'll address them and go from there. So with that said, I suppose I'll just get started on some kata, and then we can go into maybe some hojo-ando after that, unless somebody comes in with questions. Naihanchi is always a good place to start. We'll do Naihanchi Shodan from Shorin-ryu, which is my core system. Kobayashi Shorin-ryu specifically. That would be Chibbana Choshin's lineage of Shorin-ryu. There are 4 main branches of Shorin-ryu. There's Kobayashi, which is the one that I practice, Shobayashi, Matsubayashi, and Matsumura Seito. So if you see Shorin-ryu mentioned, it could be one of those 4, or of course any of their smaller offshoots. Those are the main 4. And so there's not, a super consistent set of material across Shorin-ryu because of that. So you may see things that are labeled Shorin-ryu that you don't recognize from Shorin-ryu that you might do. For the most part, Shorin-ryu that has Naihanchi in it will be very, very similar to what I'm about to do. So again, that was Naihanchi Shodan from Shorin-ryu. There are 3 Naihanchi kata in Shorin-ryu, Naihanchi Shodan, Nidan, and Sandan. The kind of common misconception is that they were originally one long kata and it got broken apart. But if we look at the different lineages of shurite systems that have the Naihanchi kata in them, that doesn't really work out that way. So highly unlikely that they were ever one kata. Some people definitely run them together because it saves time, you just run them back to back. But as far as we can tell, Naihanchi Shodan is the oldest one, and it goes back at least to the famous Tode Sakagawa, because his students all knew Naihanchi Shodan. We really only know 2 primary ones from Sakagawa. That would be Bushi Matsumura, who is the famous one, and Bushi Tachimura, who is much less famous, but a contemporary of Matsumura, I think a little bit older if I remember right. And he taught Naihanchi Shodan. Didn't call it Shodan because there was no Nidan or Sandan, it was just Naihanchi. Bushi Matsumura, of course, taught Naihanchi as well, and all of his students had Naihanchi. However, we then find that after Matsumura, Naihanchi Nidan shows up. So that could be because Matsumura created Naihanchi Nidan, that's possible. But it could also be that it got brought into that lineage later, because there is some debate over whether Itosu Anko made Nidan and Sandan. We're pretty confident he made Sandan because it didn't exist in any system that we could find record of prior to Itosu. So most likely he made Sandan. He may have made Nidan, but the fact that it was existing in Matsumura Seito Shorin-ryu, which has a lineage directly to Matsumura through family ties, it only had Nidan, suggests that Matsumura may have created Naihanchi Nidan. So it's interesting to see this progression of Naihanchi from Shodan being at least as old as Tode Sakagawa's teachings to Sandan being as recent as Itosu Anko at the end of the 1800s, early 1900s. So there's this fairly decent span of time that those kata were developed over. So it's interesting to see, but they really build on each other. So from Naihanchi Nidan, you go into Sandan, and you built up from material that you learned in Shodan. So with that, we'll take a look at Nidan. They take a lot of space to the right, and that always becomes a little tricky with the vertical format. So we'll see how much of it you can see. So Naihanchi Nidan doesn't start this way, right? And that's another kind of breakaway that we see. All of a sudden we have this yoi instead from either Matsumura or Itosu, right? So it's an interesting thing that the yoi position changed for these kata as well. So there is Naihanchi Nidan. And it, at first glance, seems like it's pretty different from Naihanchi Shodan. Obviously, you have the same stepping, the side-to-side stepping, which is really just telling you to orient yourself sideways to the opponent to make the applications work. And other than that, of course, we see this kind of a sequence from Shodan. But then you've got some other interesting things. This position shows up, right? Now this position shows up later in Pasai, as well as Goju Shiho. So that's something that ties into kata later on, essentially connecting the elbow components of Naihanchi into material that comes later, right? We now have this supported position, which is really usually trapping or pinning something, or telling you that you're attacking this part of the opponent's arm, right? And we've got it coming across, and we've got it coming back. That'll show up again in Sandan, but we also have similar motions without the pinning in some versions of Pasai, especially with the scoop first, and even the beginning of the kata, where we're pointing that hand here as opposed to here, is similar in approach. So start to expand on Naihanchi a little bit and connect it to later kata. Hopefully that makes sense. And of course, if anybody has questions, please feel free to throw them in the chat. I'm also going to real quick hop in here and hit share to some people, because we might as well, right? See who all is available to hop in, have a chat, see if there are any questions or any topics for discussion we might want to pick up. So I apologize for me staring blankly at the screen while I do that. All right, invited some people, we'll see how that goes. But from here we'll go into Naihanchi Sandan, which again is building on what we've already done in Shodan and Nidan. And again, it goes a ways to the right. I think I may have cut you off a little bit on that side. Sorry about that if you couldn't see any of that. But that part was just repeating this arm wrap, down, pull, punch sequence on the other side. And so again, we're seeing things that are familiar, but slightly different and connect to later kata. Even just from the beginning, right? This position in the naname, or angled Zenkutsurachi front stance, with this Chudanuke, right? Of course, we see that in Pasai and in Kusonku. So that's coming directly from there. But all that it really is this with a lean, right? So it's not that much different. We get into this sequence, which is really just expanding on what we already had in Naihanchi Shodan. In the Shorin-ryu version that I do, the hand circles this way when you do Naihanchi Shodan. Some versions will go all the way around the head, some will come to the side of the head, and it's essentially trying to tell you that you can deflect, cover, brush block, parry, all kinds of things with that motion before you strike out with it. And Naihanchi Sandan is basically just being a little more explicit about it. You can go this way, or you can go this way. And there's the circling motion for your striking before we get into the linear punching, right? Which is a little bit different. We don't have the straightforward punching motion in the other Naihanchi kata. But then we get into this position that's familiar, right? The wrapping is new. It's really just a big Chudanuke, right? Really big. Then we get into get under eye, which we've done before, a stacked hands position, and of course we did this earlier. Okay? So some new stuff and some very familiar stuff. Oh, let's see if Kyle wants to go live. It's popping up the lovely extra screens again.
Okay. Okay.
Who's here?
Oh. What's up?
Decided to go live and been doing a little bit of Naihanchi so far.
Yeah, I got in a little late, but I'm going to do some invites real quick to try and boost your numbers.
Sure, I appreciate that. I figured if nothing else, I can drag you in here and bother you for a while.
Yes, oh, so bothering.
You can blame TikTok. It popped it up and said that you were online and I could invite you. So it's TikTok's fault.
It's true. It's true. Did it not work?
So all I really have done so far is Naihanchi Nidan, Shodan, Nidan, and Sandan, and kind of explained a little bit of the history behind them and how the different variations and what they're doing connect them.
Ow! Pinch my finger in my. There we go. Cool. I kind of wish I heard some of that. I know Naihanchi history is a little. A lot of Shorin-ryu history. It's not as clear cut as like Goju-ryu stuff. So.
And that makes sense because Goju is newer in a way.
Yes, it's like. I mean, it's 1910s plus, right?
Yeah, basically. I mean, Shorin-ryu didn't get named until basically the same couple of days as Goju did. They named their systems within days of each other. But that's, of course, naming it officially with the government. So that doesn't mean that that's when the style first existed. It's just when it got named.
Goju's prominence stemmed from Miyagi.
Yes.
Who was fairly young, because prior to that, it wasn't as streamlined. And Shorin-ryu has been fairly streamlined since
Sakagawa, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, we go. It's kind of what I discussed already. Was that we can go as far back as Sakagawa with Naihanchi Shodan.
Yeah. And prominent Shorin-ryu kata, Kusanku, Chinto. Well, Seisan's super old in general, obviously.
Right.
Goju Shiho, all these forms go way back. When you look at the prominent Goju kata, and you go far back enough, and they just turn into kung fu.
Yes. Whereas Shorin-ryu forms, I mean, some of them can do that, but it's basically just like Seisan and Goju Shiho. Other than that, you've got, Kusanku again goes back to Sakagawa Chatanyara-ish.
Yep.
Pasai we usually attribute to Matsumura, but at the same time, his contemporary who also trained under Sakagawa taught Pasai. So was Pasai created before that, or did Matsumura create it and Tachimura picked it up? We don't know.
That's why I hate Pasai. I love it, but I hate it.
I love Pasai, though. Hey,
Pasai,
Paul.
Hey, Paul, how's it going? I love Pasai, but I think I've talked to you about my history in learning Pasai, and it's like, yeah.
Yeah, Pasai, there's so many versions of Pasai that things get confusing as well. And even
my version is super simple.
Yeah.
I had a feeling he was going to show up.
Hey, Paul.
Hey, how you doing?
Hey, Paul.
Good, how are you?
I'm trying to figure out how to turn the camera on. Aha, there we go.
Hit camera. There you go. You figured it out, I think.
I think I figured it out.
When's the last time you went live?
Oh, well, it's been a while. Let's see. There we go. How's that?
Nope.
No? Still nothing?
Technical
There we
difficulty.
go.
There we go.
All right. It's been a minute. I think we did once. So, how is Arizona?
Huh?
How's Arizona?
Surprisingly chilly today. It has been warming up, and then today it decided to get all cloudy and chilly on me.
Oh.
I mean, admittedly, chilly for Arizona.
Yeah, right. So
like
like 92 degrees then.
No, it's like 65.
Oh, okay, that's not bad.
Right? No.
So what is our conversation focused on today?
So right now, I've just been talking about Naihanchi. I ran through Naihanchi Shodan, Nidan, and Sandan, and kind of went over some history about it and a little bit of theory on how it connects from one kata to the next, and then from the Naihanchi series into other.
So I had a question about that. Naihanchi in general, the way Shorin-ryu looks at it, depending on the style, there were toes forward, toes in, or toes out. What way do you do it?
So I do two of them because I do two different systems of martial arts that do Naihanchi.
Okay.
So there is purpose between all three of those, but it's going to vary on the practitioner. So I do toes in for Shorin-ryu, and I do toes out for Kishimoto-di. Interesting little factoids, though, is that Funakoshi, Tensuyabu, Hanashiro Chomo, these people who trained under Itosu and learned his Naihanchi, are pictures of them doing Naihanchi in Shikodachi. That'd be toes out, right?
Shikodachi is gross.
Oh, yeah.
You
think about that.
Toes in version. So as far as we can tell, based on the fact that those people show doing the kata that way, and there's actually photos in Funakoshi's book where he is doing Naihanchi Nidan and Sandan in Shikodachi, but he's doing Naihanchi Shodan in a toes-in position.
And it makes me wonder if that's just him being lazy. Could be.
Well,
Not that.
I don't think so, because I think, based on the fact that Kishimoto-di teaches as Shikodachi, and we have these pictures of, practitioners in the early 1900s doing it in Shikodachi, I am more inclined to think that Shikodachi was the original stance used in Naihanchi.
Yeah, because if you look right there, in
Why
Naihanchi
is-
Nidan.
Why
If
is
you can see the
Naihanchi
picture.
Dachi? Why is the term Naihanchi Dachi prevalent then?
Because it was created specifically for Naihanchi by Itosu. And we know
So
that
Naihanchi came
Itosu,
first.
we know that Itosu created the stance because Motobu said so.
Oh, okay.
He didn't like it as well.
Yeah, how does Motobu do
So
Naihanchi?
speaking of stances, because you had mentioned about Funakoshi, I'm just looking here at a picture of Pinan Nidan. It says it's from Shorin-ryu. If you look at his back foot, his toes are pointed to the side.
Oh yeah.
Right? Can you see that? So his knee would be tracked to the outside, to the sideways, and so if he was taking forward pressure back, it would hurt his anterior cruciate on his knee, right? So that's not good for him. Like
Nope.
if he was talking about pressure going forward, but what would the application be sideways like that? I mean, is it lazy stance or is it purposeful? Right?
Or is it
Makes you
purposely
wonder.
lazy?
The world may never know.
No. Well, because he's dead, you can't not like you can ask him.
Yeah, he didn't write it down, and so.
Necromancy.
Right.
But yeah, at the very least, with Naihanchi's stance work, we can take an educated guess that Shikudachi was the older version, based on the fact that Kishimoto-di does it that way, and Tomari systems tend to do it that way.
Oh,
Do I have to start doing Naihanchi and Shikadachi now?
Huh?
Do I have to start doing Naihanchi and Shikadachi now?
Only when you're doing the Tachimura version.
I want to try it now in Shikadachi, just to
You
feel
can.
it.
You can. Absolutely. It changes the mechanics.
Yeah.
The big change, and so the reason, as far as I can make an educated guess, although it's famous that he was a student of Matsumura, most of his training time was with a man named Nagahama who taught Nahate, which is the root of Uechi-ryu and Goju-ryu and Toan-ryu. And he very explicitly says in his book that on his deathbed, Nagahama told him he basically taught him the bodybuilding and strengthening and conditioning components of karate, not the fighting aspects, and to go back to Matsumura at that time. So, like, years training probably something like Sanchin, if not Sanchin. And if you look at Naihanchi Dachi, look at Sanchin Dachi.
Yeah.
The only difference is the angle. It's the same thing.
Oh, yeah.
So my theory is that Itosu took Sanchin Dachi and put it into Naihanchi. And that's not an unusual thing to do because some Chinese styles already do stuff like that. Wing Chun, for example, has a stance that's very much like that.
Yep, it's a sheep shearing stance.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's one of those things that we can take a pretty educated guess. The stance was probably originally Shikodachi.
Oh.
And Itosu changed it to the toes in Naihanchi Dachi that he made for it specifically.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. Taking that structural concept of Sanchin and applying it to Naihanchi.
And the interesting thing about it, like you can hate on Itosu for starting the modernization process that led to the watering down of karate, but you can't fault his development of mechanics and structure. And that's the interesting thing with Naihanchi Dachi that a lot of people get wrong. And they think that your knees wobble all around when you do this. What's actually supposed to be happening is you're exerting force down and out. And by that, you're maintaining tension in your legs that makes this the line of pressure, not this, right? Normally, gravity's working on us like that, right? Straight up and down. So if you look that way, my knee is unsupported. But by putting that pressure down and out, I change the angle
He's
of
talking
pressure
about
so that my knee is in line with my toe.
these
So when I move, it looks like my knee is wobbling, but in reality, what's happening is my knee is tracking over my toes at an angle because of the pressure. Yeah. And what that does is allows me to push with one side and pull with the other because I can track my knee over my toes, rotate my hips, and generate a lot of rotational power. You cannot do that in Shikodachi. If you try to use your hips in Shikodachi, then you do wobble your knees, put a lot of strain on them. And so now all of a sudden you have to derive your power from other methods. You can't do leg drive anymore. You've got to twist at the waist, which is what Malibu said to do. And you've got to do sinking and rising, which is what Kishimoto-D likes to do. And you've got to do moving your entire body into things because you can't use your hip drive.
The way you explained Naihanchi power generation and rotational energy and keeping those knees in line with the feet, that reminds me, and I don't know how well this relates, but my old sensei used to talk about a concept kind of similar in feeling, but with that rotational, he talked about hip crease and opening a hip crease and closing a hip crease. And then using that, you're corkscrewing into the ground, into that hip as you close it, and then releasing and exploding from that. And then either allowing that opening to close the next hip or to just stay neutral. And we applied that to even further through movement, through stepping. Whether you're walking heel to toe or toe to heel, and you would have that explosive outward energy from the heel to toe step, and it would be an open hip. I'm really exaggerating.
Yeah.
You think you're stepping through and opening, and it's like that push, and then heel to toe, you close, and it's internal, and it causes that internal vibration. Does that make sense?
And that's really just one of several ways to basically incorporate visualization into the training, right? You start to visualize what the hip crease is doing. That gives you something to focus on to try and make sure you're doing the mechanics correctly. I approach it a little differently than that. I don't do the hip crease component. I just use a different visualization tool, but it's the same idea. And the nice thing about developing that rotational power through Naihanchi is that then eventually you can get that rotational power without necessarily being in a perfect Naihanchi dachi.
Yeah.
And that's where you get into things like, I love pointing this out because nobody seems to pay that much attention. When a boxer does a hook, what's their front foot do?
Yeah.
And so for a split second, if we just put the heel down, I'm in Sanshin dachi, really, right? But it's the same idea. We're turning that in to generate rotational power, and you just do that momentarily, and then you go back out. You can then start applying it into things even like a cat stance or neko ashidachi, right? Because we've got a leg that can push and pull pretty freely because there's no weight on it, really. So now we don't have to worry about hurting our knee because we're not loaded up and then putting our knee into funny positions. It's back here, but it can pull me and push me rotationally. And that's a concept we get from Naihanchi as well. So it's really good for teaching power generation. It's just that a lot of people don't learn the stance correctly in the first place, and then you can't learn generation of power from it. So it's not an easy stance to do.
No, I remember growing up learning Naihanchi. I learned Naihanchi at 13, and really learning how to resist that external pressure, gripping the floor and driving my knees outwards and downwards, and all the strain I felt on my knees, but developing that strength and that resistance. It's very natural to me now, but it's a complicated concept.
And one of the dangers with it And so that's the thing with Naihanchi Dachi too, is that you have to find your own version of Naihanchi Dachi, because everybody likes to comment on how like the skeleton and the human body is built the same for everybody, but it's not really. I mean, if all you need to do is look up archaeological comparisons of skeletal structures. People from different parts of the world are built slightly differently. It's not a ton, right? A lot of people from Asian countries, for example, have a different angle to their femoral head. So their hips just fit differently. And then, of course, you get into the lengths of different bones. So there's a lot of systems that try and do the like, this stance must be this wide and this long, and that kind of stuff. And Naihanchi Dachi, you really can't do that. You have to find where it fits you. So narrower, wider, toes turned in more, toes turned in less, and you have to find that. And in doing so, people can go through phases of just doing things not very well. I know I did. One of the things that I did wrong that hurt my knees was trying to push my knees out so much that I ended up with the house shape. Right? The bow-legged situation, more like motobu. So what happened was I turned my feet more forward so I could do that. But all that is a higher up kibidachi. Kibidachi, I'll try and do it for you guys. Kibidachi is this thing with your toes pointed forward and your knees bent out like Shiko. The problem is your toes are going this way and your knees are going that way, and that is not good for you.
I had always learned Kibadachi not as low.
Yeah, we did too.
My Shikodachi would be low with the open feet, open hip, open feet, and then I'd bring it up slightly to release that pressure, and it's more of it's like a diet Shikodachi.
Diet Shiko. I like it. Yeah, it depends on the style, right? Some are doing it low and some are doing it high.
Yeah.
Well, the style in the school individually.
Like a Taekwondo school I visited one time wanted it real low. And then, like we just didn't do it it's not very deep. I wonder if I'll have to look through some of the old books and see if I can find out, like the way Shotokan did it for Teki next time I'm in class.
Yeah, as I recall, Funakoshi did it about like this.
Yeah. Which I like that. I'm cool with that. I like that. That's pretty good.
That's all right. But again, as far as I'm concerned, that's still finding your Naihanchi Dachi. Because what you've got to do is you've got to find the point where you can make your knees track over your toes. And that's going to be a different angle and height for everybody. So it's one of those things that people look at an example of Naihanchi Dachi and they think, okay, that's how you do Naihanchi Dachi. But it's going to be slightly different for everybody. But the big one I see is either people letting their knees sag in, right? That's the easiest one, is letting your knees sag in. I'm exaggerating a ton. Yeah. Or pushing them too far out. And if I use my trusty stick again, if you push them too far out, now you can see that the line of pressure is going out past my foot. So now my knee is wobbling. So you've got to find the position that works for your body.
Yeah. I appreciate this explanation, because some of these things, and this happens between styles, obviously, there are unwritten or unspoken truths to something that you learn. And then all of a sudden you hear an explanation of it and you're like, oh, that makes sense. The whole idea of tracking knee to foot in that angle, I've always done that, but it's never been a vocal concept.
Yeah.
So you explaining that, I'm like, oh, now that has meaning.
Good. I'm always glad to hear that I've made something make sense.
Yeah. You do a lot. Give yourself more credit, dude.
Well, once in a while you spout a gem.
Yeah. Every I'm gonna have dinner. Thanks for the visit. I'll see both of you soon.
Thanks for coming in. And July.
Yeah, right. It's not too far.
Nope.
So now I got to figure out how to get out of here.
We'll talk about that class we were mentioning before too.
Oh yeah, sure. How do I get out of here?
You should just close the app.
Okay,
the
sweet.
top. He just went pause.
Hey,
Okay,
there
he's
he
gone.
went. There he went.
Paul
But,
wants
yeah.
me to Paul wants me to teach a class on the snap.
Oh, okay.
And I'm like trying to think of how I'm gonna do like a significant amount of like training towards that to make sense for some young students. Because
I go for Naihanchi Dachi for that, but that is difficult for kids. So
yeah. Well, I've got a few ideas. Like, I want to start the class with like relaxation, like literally almost meditation, breathing, getting the body loose, doing a lot of this stuff.
Yep.
Just loosening up, because tension is the enemy of the snap. And then just going over those simple ideas of squeeze and relax, and then the breathing and I don't know. It's going to be interesting. And it's funny.
Not something that generally gets taught in a single class, so it's a challenge for sure.
And him being an hour and a half away makes that annoying.
Hey, but he's relatively close, all things considered. I'm across the but
I've heard for now.
For now. So we'll take that offline. But
okay. I had a feeling.
Yeah, but
Nothing.
For the snap thing, relaxation is the key. One of the things that I like to have people do too is to try to work from a relaxed circle. And I can show you from Naihanchi Dachi easier than I can show you from other things, because that's kind of my base of things. But essentially, right, you were talking about having them swinging and relaxing, and that's usually where I'll start people. And the idea is then that you've got to put a little bit of shape into it. So what we want to do is just from relaxed position, try to use your hip and your shoulder to swing your arm out in the direction that it needs to go, right? You're not trying to do anything with your arm muscles. You're just letting it go. And then you need to put a little shape to it, right?
So my sensei, we used to do that, but he would make us take our arms out of our sleeves. And you'd have to try and get your armless sleeve to do the same thing.
Yeah.
That'll be fun.
This can be a secret weapon for making things sound snappy when they're not. But yeah, then basically I try to have people swing it back and kind of move it in a circle. So they swing it back and swing it forward. Swing it back and forward. And you just start adding shape to it, right? But if you stop, like a lot of people tend to do, you tense up. So you try and make it this flowing circular motion, and it only stops at the end. And you put a little shape to it. That's generally how I kind of start people on that. But like I said, it's not something you usually get in one class. So it's going to be a challenge for you to get people through that. It'll be fun.
Well, and it could probably be like a monthly thing.
Yeah, to work on. I used to do about once a month classes that have focused on power generation specifically when I was teaching at my late sensei's dojo. Because it's one of those difficult things. Like, you can become proficient in a kata and even proficient in application, but inefficient because you don't have the full breadth and depth of power generation involved.
Well, and how many high-class, high-ranking martial artists do we see all over social media that are 6th, 7th, 8th, 10th degree black belts that know the movement, know the concepts, but look like robots?
Very stiff, blocky, squared off. And some of them just doing things that are completely ineffective. So the one that drives me nuts is the long stance Zenkutsudachi with the punch while you're perfectly upright.
Yeah.
I'll have to back up for people to see it. So the long Zenkutsudachi, longer than I would normally do them, and you're straight upright and square, and people will do punches like that. The thing about this is so extended I can't really drive with it anymore. I can only really turn my shoulders square because of how far back this is, so I can't twist very far the other direction, because you want to make this shoulder go forward because you're punching with that side. And by being upright, you're putting a really sharp curve in your lower spine, which is not good for your spine, but it also breaks the connection between your upper and lower body. Sticks your belly out, you can't really bring your hips in very well. So people do that and they think, oh, low stance, you're grounded, you're getting more power. And actually you are losing the vast majority of the power you could have had by punching that way. And I see people do it on a Makiwara like 100 times a day. I'm like, why? I don't try and bash other systems, but that mechanically is just completely ineffective for power. It is what it is.
I need to get a proper cover for my Makiwara, like a punching pad.
Oh, yeah.
Mine's
I just make mine.
Well, yeah, but you've got leather working tools, don't you?
I do, but really, all you need is a utility knife, and you can get a Harbor Freight leather hole punch for like $12, and that's all you need.
I just use a drill press.
You can do it. You can do it with a drill press, absolutely. So yeah,
I did a bit of leather working.
But yeah, that's all I've ever done with my Makiwara. Is I always just make pads, and I've got one that's rope. I do have a rope pad. That's something that I think a lot of people do wrong too.
This is wrapped in rope. Okay, and apparently shock towel. Forgot about that. There. So that's oh well. I guess I can move my camera. So there is the rope wrap.
Yeah, so not that.
Yeah, well, and that's why I added more to it.
Yeah, because that's not really doing what it's supposed to do.
There's a piece of leather underneath it, but it's one little 1/8-inch piece of leather.
Yeah, that's not really doing much for you. So for those who don't know, when you're doing rope Makiwara pads, it's not just wrapping the board in rope. I see that all the time, but I mean, we have instructions on how to make them. There's been book after book from the early 1900s and even after World War II that show you how to make the rope pad, and it's not wrapping the Makiwara in rope. I realize the name Makiwara means wrapped rope, but what it is you bunch up a bunch of the rope. So you just make a bunch of loops about this long so that you squeeze them there, and then you wrap around them so you've got a round, tightly wrapped bundle of rope. Then you pin that flat and tie it to the board. Because it is supposed to be padding. It just happens to have texture to it with the rope, which will condition your hands, but the real benefit to the texture of the rope is that you can then start striking upward and downward into it without sliding off the pad.
I need to fix the foundation of it. Since Paul's Makiwara, the foundation on the wall is the full height of the Makiwara. You can see.
Yeah.
And it's starting to already come off the wall.
Yeah. Mounting them to the wall is always the challenging bit. I am lucky to have the bit of kit that I have. I've got one that's on a platform, but I'll go ahead
and the same one that Sensei John uses, Sensei Kenny.
Yeah.
Didn't he get his from you?
No. So This monstrosity, which has dip bars and pull-up bars on both sides, as well as a slidable one up top.
Yeah.
It's got mounting brackets for extra stuff that I don't have room for. It holds 2 heavy bags, and it has 2 Makiwara mounts. And so I'm lucky in that respect because this isn't gonna break.
Now, when you hit it, does it skid across the floor?
No, it does not. And it does not because this thing weighs about a literal ton.
Well, that's good.
Yes, it is. This is like 1/4-inch steel tubing that this whole thing's made out of. And underneath the mat down here is a about, I'm bad at numbers, but about 1/3 of an inch thick steel plate that's about 4 feet-ish, 3 to 4 feet out from the bottom of this thing and all the way across. So it literally weighs almost a ton.
Yeah, okay, you're not moving that.
No, well, I do move it when I'm hitting the heavy bag because then you're getting
the heavy bag
and bouncing. Yeah. So when I'm kicking the heavy bag, I do move it a bit. So I had to pad some parts of it. It has holes so I can bolt it down. I just haven't done that. We'll put this.
All right.
back.
Well, I'm going to head off.
All right. I appreciate you jumping in.
Yeah, I'm happy to. It was kind of last minute thing, so I was like, oh yeah, let's do it. But yeah, I'll message you later.
Sounds good.
Hopefully, more people jump in the live and hear some good knowledge.
If not, I'll just make a fool of myself doing some karate stuff.
Hey, look into your settings, your live settings, and you'll see you can go in and go back to old lives, and you can actually download them or pick from them and make content out of that stuff. And then you can kind of recycle live content for your TikTok channel.
I was wondering about that because I can do it with Instagram, so I figured I could probably do it with TikTok. I just hadn't looked into it yet, but I'll probably do that.
And then even if people aren't watching, at least you can use it for later.
Yeah.
Okie dokie.
Thanks for jumping in.
I'll talk to you later.
All right.
All right. So that brings us to just me by my lonesome. So I'll go ahead and go back to the regularly scheduled programming of the evening for a little bit longer. Not too much, I don't think. Saw me while we were talking, doing a couple different exercises with the Chishi. One was the outward circles. This is quite a challenging one, and it can put a lot of strain on the inside of your elbow. So it's something that you really need to start light with if you decide you're going to do that. I generally start people with a 6-pound one. You can go as even lower than that. You can just use a ball peen hammer for it because it can be a lot of strain for people. But you're holding it out far, basically full extension on your arm. You twist your wrist this way, and it makes the weight want to go outward. And that kind of mechanic should be familiar to anybody who does sanshin, especially. So you're turning it in, falling, and if I take that away, we're getting into kind of a sanshin-esque position. A little exaggerated because there's weight hanging off of the end of it, right? So turning, rotating through, and extending back out this way. And it is quite a challenge compared to some of the other exercises that you could be doing with a Chishi, right? Now, one of the other ones that I was doing was two-handed as opposed to one-handed, where we're swinging it behind the back, right? So you're basically pushing the weight back over one shoulder, and you want it to swing like a pendulum behind you, and then pull it back over your other shoulder this way. This is very popular with mace bell exercise. It's easier if it's got a longer handle than when you've got a shorter one, right? And I usually use a heavier one for that as well, because it builds momentum as you swing it, so more weight gives you a bit more swing, essentially. But there's some other two-handed ones that I'm fond of, which I've gone over before, but we can go over a little bit now again. The easy being subjective, straightforward one is the overhead swing, right? Bring this over all the way out, and then we've got a half ringing that we can add. So we can actually bring it all the way over, and we can add a sink into shikodachi when we do that, and then we bring it into the chest, grab tight, push out, and we're effectively wringing it like a towel, trying to get the water out, right? So you're really getting a wrist and forearm workout doing that, in addition to the downward pull, because you have to pull the weight over your head, right? So you're effectively powering this kind of a motion. So things like your back fist, your shuto, your hammer fist, right, where you're coming down. But you also have to stop it. And that's something that people kind of forget as well, is the stopping aspect, whether you're doing it one-handed or two-handed, stopping it, locking everything in, bringing your lats in, and dropping your elbow, is essentially the structure you need, right, for strong strikes. But it's also good grappling positions, because it's strong structure. So you're really getting a lot of benefit out of simple exercises with the Chishi. They're very versatile, and I like them for that. Another one that I'm fond of, Chishi curls. This is one that's easy to do incorrectly also. I usually teach it from Naihanchi Dachi. You grab both hands palm down, one hand close to the weight, one at the other end. You want to try and keep the handle of the Chishi parallel to the floor or close to it. All your arms are doing really is a curl. The thing about it is that you're using your body to do this. And you're using that to help you move the Chishi. So it will look like the Chishi is moving in this C shape. But realistically, it's a curl that my body is moving through an arc. So my arms really are just doing a curl. My body is moving away from the weight and towards the weight. That does mean that my muscles have to work to change direction. So it's more than just a curl, because now I have to work to move it and work to stop it. Because even though my arms are just doing a curl, my body doing that motion makes the Chishi want to go that way. And we don't want to throw it, right? So we've got a curl with our arms that our body is turning into an arc, and therefore putting strain on our body in a slightly different way. And the movements of that should look pretty familiar, right? Those show up in Naihanchi Shodan, going back to kind of what we were working on in the beginning with Naihanchi. I especially like that one for helping people work that rotational power generation for Naihanchi, because if you don't drive with your hips to move your body, the Chishi won't go in that arcing motion. It'll just be a curl. So it kind of forces you to work that rotation. So it's really good for that, and I'm quite fond of it. The other ones I like to combine are the shovel exercise and the spear exercise. Some people will call the first one a wood chopper. I honestly don't get why, because I've chopped a lot of wood in my day. You don't do it like this. But one palm at the end of the haft, palm down, palm near the weight, palm up. You're going to turn back and throw it up over your shoulder. Right? And people will call that wood choppers, and that is not how you chop wood, so I don't understand. But I call it the shovel exercise because it's a lot more like you've shoveled something and are throwing it back over your shoulder. So holding it at your solar plexus level, right? So you pulled your elbows back, basically like hikite. Some people do their hikite lower, and that's fine because you can do the exercise from there. I simply teach to pull to where you're strongest. So if you were doing something like heavy rows, right? Barbell rows, for example, if you were doing those, you are probably not doing your rows to your hips, right? When you're doing rows, you're probably doing it closer to the bottom of your rib cage or your chest. So you want to pull to where you're strongest because hikite is for pulling things, primarily. And if it's going to be pulling things, you should be pulling to where you're strong, right? So find the position where you're strong. That's where you pull it to. Try and keep this nice and flat here. Use your body twisting to start it moving, and then you're going to throw it up over your shoulder and then pull it back. And you can just repeat this. You can also do hand exchanges in between. But the spear exercise is taking a step forward and thrusting it and twisting it at the end. And those two combine really well because it forces you to essentially move your body with momentum. Or inertia. If you want to look at it that way, that's probably more accurate. So we throw this over our shoulder, and as we pull this in, it makes our body want to rotate this way, which is fine because we want to go that way. So we use that rotation to step, and then we've got our spear exercise. And then we can do hand exchange, spear exercise. So you can combine that in any way you like doing multiples of one or the other or both. It's a really good workout in general, so I'm highly fond of it. Let's see, what haven't I gone over here? I haven't gone over the little dumbbells. Shiredo actually makes dumbbells that are meant for this, but that costs a lot, and you don't need it. So if you get dumbbells like this, and this is not a sponsorship anything, but the hex ones tend to have it where the number is kind of a cutout. That means there's this little lip around it. Then you've got sanchin, or rather nigirigame, gripping jar dumbbells. You hook the edge of your thumb under that lip, and you curl your fingers around the rest of it. And you squeeze it, and there's your nigirigame, or your gripping jars. Okay? And you can work sanchin stepping, right? With this, you can work seiunshin stepping, sort of a situation, where we're bringing our shikodachi through to 45-degree angles. You can work from a stationary position, right, lifting these up. You can swing them. That's one that people occasionally do. It's quite a challenge. Outward as well. All kinds of exercises that you can do with those. Gripping jars are not popular these days. But people also really want to have good grip strength. And so they start doing a lot of weird stuff, which is fine. But karate was meant to help you develop grip strength, which kind of ties back into our hikite. The Chishi develops grip strength, right? The Makiwara Kigu, which I don't have out right now, but that's the lifting wrapping tool. Well, wrapping lifting tool. It's just a wrist roller that, you roll the weight up on a rope. That strengthens your grip, right? The exercises I was just doing with gripping jars strengthens your grip. Swinging around ishisashi, stone locks, or kettlebells strengthens your grip. Karate has a ton of exercises for strengthening your grip. I wonder why. This is important. Hikite is there to pull stuff, right? It's really easy to think of it as a chamber position for me doing other things. But really what you're doing is pulling something. Every now and then, you are just pulling your hand because you're trying to get it free of a tangle. That does happen on occasion. Sometimes it is an elbow to the rear. That can be true. Sometimes the kata does just do this because you don't need it. We're going to do several things maybe with our other hand. And you don't need this, so it's just telling you, do whatever you need to do. Right? You can put it wherever you like. But most of the time, hikite, the pulling hand, is literally what that means. Hikite is pulling something, some part of the opponent. And that is why I really like Chibana Choshin's Kiongata, basic forms, because the first two of them start telling you exactly what hikite does. Somehow, some people still miss it. But the beginning of those kata are reach, grab, pull, and punch. And I don't know how you could be more explicit about what the application of hikite is than that, without having a second person involved. So it's a really good way to introduce that right off the bat, in my opinion. Very first move of the very first kata tells you reach out and grab something and pull it when you strike. So it's an important concept for karate. It basically is what karate is built around, is that you're grabbing a hold of them while you're hitting, locking, strangling, throwing. But we're doing a lot of grabbing. That's not true of all systems, right? Uechi-ryu does a lot of moving and maybe grabbing at the end, but not going in so much, right? Not as much pulling, a little more holding it out. And that's just a stylistic preference, right? So we're coming to the outside and we're grabbing, but we're not pulling it in. We're just keeping it where it is. Nothing wrong with that. But the majority of karate has a lot of hikite to it. Sometimes double, right? And it's important to remember what that's for. And it's not a mystery. We've had several Okinawan masters of the past write about it, telling you that it's to pull the opponent's arm and off-balance them. We've got examples of them doing it photographically. We've got hints in the form of, like I mentioned, Hojo Ando Kigu that's building grip strength, right? We have the fact that it's called hikite, pulling a hand. It is important, in my opinion, to note that hikite, as a name and a concept, also is found in judo. You have a pulling hand and a lifting hand in judo when you're doing your throws. So it's important to bring that up, in my opinion, right? Hikite is not a mystery. So if you see people practicing even basics like this, right? And they are pulling and never pulling something in practice. They're just doing a lot of solo techniques, right? Solo techniques in the air all the time for a full class. Never using this for anything, especially when they do partner work. Somebody punches them and they do this, or they punch somebody and do that, and that pulling hand hasn't pulled something, then I would question that, because that's a key feature of karate. But with that said, I'm going to go ahead and sign off for the evening. It's been great going through this with you guys. I hope you found it valuable, and I hope you have a good evening.